and commit. And that person walks away. So that data is supposed to be durable. And then way out here, I'm like, oh shit, something went wrong, I have to abort. But if I aborted, this other transaction that read a value I wrote shouldn't ever have happened. So we would have to go abort that transaction too. Oh shit, but some other transactions that have committed might have read values written by this transaction. So if we do non-strict 2PL, we could have what's called a cascading abort, where it's hard to determine the bounds of how many transactions need to abort. And if we have a cascading abort, we're very likely to run afoul of durability, right? Because we told you if your shit commits, it's durable. Which meant when this guy committed, we couldn't tell the client, and we might not be able to tell the client for arbitrarily long, right? So to avoid this whole hornet's nest, it's easier to just release all your locks right away. And that makes sure that we have what's called recoverable schedules. So this is more terminology than we're used to doing in this class. Can you tell that I would use a TA in this class?
Question?
Yeah.
Wait, how do you release the lock slowly? Like,
Well, I get a lock on X, and then I get a lock on Y, and then I get a lock on Z.
okay.
And then maybe I release my lock on X. I do some other things.
Okay.
I release my lock on Y, I release my lock on Z. Right? But in any case, if it's 2PL, the one restriction is like once you've released your first lock, you can't acquire any more locks. If you did that, it wouldn't be strict at all. Okay. Yeah?
Are we still concerned with the time that it takes to replace our locks? Or will it still take time to like propagate through like your vector of locks or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, no, because I don't think there's anything we can do about it.
Cool.
I don't think there's anything we can do about it. But like, yeah, I think like you might look at it this way and say like, while you're releasing your lock, can somebody else come along? And the answer is no. For exactly that reason. Okay. So that's strict 2PL. Like normally in a database class, you'd spend a couple days on it. But I think that's kind of the gist of it. Maybe in the next class we won't have time today, but maybe in the next class we'll actually look at some conflicting schedules and show how acquiring the locks in the right order makes the things happen in the right order. Yeah.
So in this model, you got a lock on every item in the database.
I got a lock on every item that I touched, either reading or writing.
So not on the database as a whole.
Oh, that's a great question. So the granularity of locks, remember I was really careful to just say object.
Right.
So the granularity of locks is orthogonal to this. So as long as you do this, you're good. And then it's like, what could you lock? Well, you could lock like the database. But if you lock the database, you wouldn't get very good interleaving, right? You could lock tables and get better interleavings. But better than that, you could lock rows in tables. So typically when we say objects, we're talking about the rows and the tables. Now there's a trade-off here, right? Because the coarser grain the lock, the less concurrency, but the lower the overhead of maintaining the locks, right? So you go even further than that. You can say some databases have locks on the individual columns in rows. You're like, I'm updating name. I'm not conflicting with somebody who's updating salary. We can just proceed in parallel. The thing is, as you start going down this road, you have this massive index into your lock table that you have to go log n to even find a lock before you can twiddle it, right? So that's the trade-off. Is like finer grain means more concurrency and more overhead. Coarser grain means less concurrency and less overhead. This definition doesn't care about the granularity of the objects. It's just if you log in the database, well, everything conflicts with everything, so it's kind of trivialized. Let's take a moment. We have a moment? We have like a moment. How do you think optimistic concurrency control works? Here's like a high-level question. Do you think that you can implement optimistic concurrency control without locks?
Sure.
How? Well, I should say that more. You can always have something about locks. Locks are just mechanisms. Can you implement optimistic concurrency control without mutual exclusion?
We can get this. You can get the cascading abort if you don't.
Let's see. Could you get cascading abort? Why do you say that?
If I guess it depends on what is meant by validate. But if I had a series of transactions, and they were successful, and then again same idea. Other transactions come in, use certain rows that were used And if I abort it later,
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, right? Yeah, so that's a fair point. I think like it's worse than that, but I think that if we don't do any validation at all, obviously people can read records of transactions and go do work where the transaction that they read is supposed to have never happened, and so there is supposed to have never happened, right? That's certainly there. I think more fundamentally though,
it's like where you
in some sense, like when you validate, what are you doing? You're checking whether that transaction that I just ran without any logs could possibly have gotten stomped on or been stomped on by some other transaction. And it would appear that in order to do that, you do need to freeze the world for a minute and say, what are all the transactions that were running concurrently with mine? And did they touch any of the same objects, right? So in some sense, at least all the implementations I know of optimistic concurrence control, we'll look at the details again on Monday, but they still lock. They just lock at the very end. They kind of do all of their work, and then they get a big lock, and they say, was it safe? And the idea is that that lock is held for like the minimal amount of time possible. But there's no way to like check if the universe is sane, right? In a universe in which a lot of concurrent things are happening, right? So I don't have time to start going into the algorithm. I think we're out of time. Are we? We have 3 minutes. Basically, the idea is make local copies of objects. Right? So you don't actually go into the database and write what you did. You make a local copy of X. You write what you want locally. And then as part of validation, like you say, validate no conflicts, and that's very high level. On Monday, I'll talk about exactly how you test if there were no conflicts, but you have to do this in a mutually exclusive way. And then install your updates. Right. Assuming that there were no conflicts, you install your updates. If there were conflicts, you abort your transaction and restart. Any questions? Which do you like better? Yeah, how come? No, only in the infinite resource case.
But he's an optimistic guy, so he's got to.
Maybe it's like it really comes down to whether you think everything's going to be okay. If you think that everything is going to be okay, you might as well be optimistic.
It's just a rock. Thanks for us. Yeah, no big deal.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. See you next week.